Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, a Northside numbers game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is now proud to be part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions group, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show and Cup of Cubby Blue. For the remainder of this year, this podcast will cross-post on my feed, the Bleacher Bunch podcast feed, and my Patreon page. Starting in January, CubsPS Plus will be exclusively found on the Bleacher Bunch podcast feed and my Patreon feed at cubspsplus.patreon.com, where you can support the show and always find ad-free episodes, along with other benefits, for as low as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus, a spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it, please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. Welcome into episode 63, the Brian Schlitter episode of this podcast. Schlitter, an Oak Park native, broke in with the Cubs in 2010 and eventually pitched 71 games across the 2014 and 2015 seasons. The last few weeks have all been about Shohei Ohtani, and this past week was to an extent also. It's time for the offseason to start moving again, but it's still slow going. Only 9 of the top 25 free agents per Fangraphs have signed at this point. A couple big trades are done, but despite making no major league moves to date, the Cubs have a lot of options still available to improve the team. While we wait, let's evaluate the roster as it stands right now. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. So here we are a week after the Shohei Ohtani bombshell last Saturday when he signed with the Dodgers for a 10-year, $700 million contract that we later found out is really kind of a 10-year, $461 million contract in terms of present value. I put a correction out last week. When I was scrambling that day, we were trying to figure out what the terms of the contract were and how exactly the deferred money works. I had an explanation from a couple good sources. One of them had used the incorrect math. I put a disclaimer on the front of the episode. So if you listened to that episode before I put the disclaimer out, I apologize. Now that we know the actual structure of the contract, Shohei Ohtani deferred $680 of the $700 million, which means over the next 10 years, the Dodgers will be paying him $2 million a year, which frees up a lot of money in their budget. It's not, though, a $2 million hit against the competitive balance tax. For that purpose, you apply a bunch of calculations, figure out the current value of the money that's deferred outside the 10-year contract window, and that amounts to about a little over $44 million per year. Add the $2 million to that, the Dodgers are going to take a CBT hit each year while they have Ohtani for $46.1 million, basically. That's interesting. There have been a lot of guys with deferred money. Max Scherzer has deferred money with the Nationals. Steven Strasburg has a bunch of deferred money. The Dodgers have already deferred $115 million on the Mookie Betts contract, $57 million, I believe, on the Freddie Freeman contract. So the Dodgers are stacking up some debts down the road. Now, there are a few things that I've seen a lot of talk this week about, well, why doesn't everybody just do that and reduce the tax hit? Well, one, everybody could. It's exclusive, or it's explicitly defined in the collective bargaining agreement how that deferred money is going to be handled. You can defer pretty much as much of it as you want. There are a few things that have to go into play, though. Now, you have to pay each player the minimum annual salary at minimum. So it's $755,000, I think, last year. So every player would have to make at least that much during the seasons that they're under contract. Then the team does ultimately have to pay that money. So the day the Shohei Ohtani contract ends, 2034, that contract's up, the Dodgers will owe him $680 million. Now, that'd be paying him in future dollars that aren't worth as much as today's dollars are, but they do have to pay him that money. And so if you're a team that decides to do that, let's say you want to have a 5-year window, throw as much massive talent in there as you can, and defer a bunch of the contract money, that's fine. You can totally do that. The team, though, is going to have to pay that money down the road. So, I don't think they overlap quite as enough, but I know the Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani deferrals are going to overlap a little bit. Maybe 1 year Freddie Freeman. Let's assume 1 year Freddie Freeman overlaps with some Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani deferrals. Shohei Ohtani is going to get $68 million every year after that contract's up. Mookie Betts is going to get about 11.5, and Freddie Freeman, say about 6. So that would mean that if there's a given year where they have to pay all three of them, 68 plus 11.5 plus 6, you're talking right around $86 million. It's a lot of money. Now, that money's not going to count against the team's competitive balance tax threshold for those years, but those are still real dollars that the ownership group has to send out. And I know, obviously these teams are owned by corporate conglomerates, really wealthy people, whatever, owned by billionaires basically. And the franchises themselves are worth billions of dollars. But that is still budget that's going to have to be laid out for those players. So at some point, that could be, it's kind of akin to like a debt obligation or an upgrade to a stadium or some other, non-baseball salary structural improvement. It's money that has to be spent. It's money that's going to affect the bottom line for those teams in those years. Now, as I say all the time, budgeting and how much money you spend on a player is a choice. The competitive balance tax threshold is a choice. You can go over it. You can go over the second threshold. You can go over the third threshold. The Yankees and Mets were both over the third threshold last year, and that's fine. Neither team made the playoffs, so that turned out to maybe not be the best investment. And they took a 10 draft slot hit in terms of lowering their draft position by 10 spots for being over that third level. But that's entirely a choice. So teams can do this. Teams can stack all that up. But I think the fact that you're going to stack that up, the fact that you're going to have to pay those dollars at some point down the road, it's going to kind of inherently limit how much any team, I think, is actually going to use the deferral process. And then the third thing, the player has to want it. Shohei Ohtani was fine with it. He made it very clear it wasn't about the money in the contract for him, which certainly is easy to say when he's expected to make 40, 50, maybe more $1 million per year just through endorsements. And he made $30 million last year. And apparently he's been making, millions. He's been making millions of dollars in Japan before he came over. So, he's set. And a lot of these players are set, but, sports careers are short. I can work in tech and I can make good money and I'm going to work for 30 years, 40 years, whatever. And my income is going to grow, but it's not at those levels. Or if let's say you're an actor, if you're a good enough actor, you're going to find work for potentially decades. Athletes, not so much. I mean, they make a ton of money. This is not a, play the sad violin for athletes thing here, but not every player is going to want to defer all that money. Looking at the signings here, Sonny Gray was signed by the Cardinals for 3 years, $63 million. Per my understanding, I don't think there was any deferred money in that contract, but Sonny Gray has never had the huge, massive payday. I'm sure he's doing quite well for himself, but he may not want to take $20 million and defer it down the road. A lot of guys want that money now. I mean, in terms of, there's a bunch of back and forth we've heard this week about, do you want the money now so you can invest it and start earning on those dollars? Do you want it later so maybe you can move your residence to a place where there's less state income tax? I mean, there's 1,000 ways to do it. But in any event, that's how that works. I wanted to go over it once since I kind of posed it up last week on the podcast. The method and the way it worked, I had correct. I just had some of the underlying numbers wrong. It looked at that point like the CBT hit on Ohtani's money was going to be closer to like $60 million than 46. But now Shohei's got his place. Time to move on. I think a lot of us were expecting to see some flurry of activity once Ohtani was gone. I mean, he was the one big fish holding up everything. If you were going to go big on Ohtani and you got him, maybe you wouldn't go on Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Maybe you wouldn't go for Cody Bellinger. Maybe you wouldn't go for Blake Snell, some of these other guys. And so now the next one up is Yamamoto. There have been a couple trades. I mean, the Soto trade happened. He got traded by the Padres to the Yankees this week. I don't know that it's final yet, but it looks like the Dodgers are going to trade for Tyler Glasnow, who had been rumored to the Cubs. Interestingly enough, baseball doesn't have sign-in trades, but the Dodgers apparently making the trade contingent upon Glasnow signing an extension. I think that got hammered out yesterday. I haven't seen that it's official. I'm sure there are medicals that have to happen. Once that's established, then they'll finish out the trade. But the Cubs, continue to do nothing. And if you're on social media at all, I mean, that's a major source of consternation. I get it. I think we're all feeling the same way. Right now, there are only 3 teams in Major League Baseball that have not made any major league level moves. The Twins, the Cubs, and the Blue Jays. There are 5 other teams that have not yet signed a free agent, but those teams have at least made major league level trades. The Red Sox, the Mariners, the Rockies, the Marlins, and the Padres. Everybody else has made some moves. Now, it's gotten to the point it's gotten almost comical. Every time some mid-level or bottom feeder team signs a, bullpen depth arm, you're like, come on, Cubs, come on, Jed, wake up. And the reality is there's still a lot on the table. So right now, if you look at the free agent tracker on Fangraphs, they had mapped out their top 25 free agents. Only 9 of those guys have signed so far. Out of the top 5, 3 of the top 5 are available. 4 of the top 10. The top guys available at the moment per Fangraphs rating are Jordan Montgomery, Cody Bellinger, Blake Snell, Matt Chapman, Marcus Stroman, Clayton Kershaw, Brandon Belt. Goes on down from there. But those are the guys that are available. And so I want to take this time, since the Cubs haven't done anything. I see a lot of speculation about, attitudes ranging from the way I feel. I think the Cubs are going to make moves. I think the Cubs are going to spend money. I think the Cubs are evaluating a variety of trades. I think they're in discussions with free agents, and this stuff just takes time. There seems to be a sense sometimes that Jed can just snap his fingers and make a move happen. That's not always true. Sometimes the free agent is still wanting to field offers from multiple teams, or wait a little bit longer and see if some teams that miss out on other free agents want to jump into the bidding. If you're talking trades, it sounds like the Cubs have been talked some trades with Tampa for Glasnow. It sounds like they're talking some trades with Cleveland Guardians, potentially for any combination of Shane Bieber, Josh Naylor, and Emmanuel Clase. So there are a lot of things on the table. Those teams are also talking with other teams. So, there's just a lot going on. These things take time. But the opinions range from, I think they're going to be okay, I think they'll make moves, to they're just not going to do anything. They hired Craig Counsell, and Counsell's job is to get more with less. And so the Cubs are going to give him less. So as I stated, I think the Cubs are going to make moves. But this episode's going to be kind of a devil's advocate of that position. What happens if they don't? Where do the Cubs stand today? What does their roster look like right now? I think to start, we have to look back at 2023. The Cubs missed the playoffs by 2 games. They were very, very close. And the season had a lot of, in some ways they overachieved and in some ways they underachieved. I mean, the Cubs seemed like they had a playoff bid just about wrapped after the Giants series. I went and saw them on Labor Day. I saw Justin Steele throw an absolute gem against the Giants. Cubs swept the Giants. They went into the first series against the Diamondbacks with a 4-game lead for the second wildcard spot. Certainly, obviously nothing was clinched because they didn't make it, but it looked like they had everything in front of them. It looked like they were in really good position. They didn't make it. So you have to kind of look and see, and I want to step back and take a look at the big picture. So I know what the team was at the end of the year, but the team that existed at the beginning of the year matters too, and that's going to go into how I evaluate the Cubs the way I do. And I guess I'll start this way. I think the Cubs, if the season started tomorrow using nothing but players that are currently in the organization, I'm not saying it has to be, the end of the season's, 26-man roster with subs in for the free agents that have left. People who are in the organization right now, I think the Cubs probably have something pretty close to a 500 team. I think it's an 80 to 83 or 4 win team as it stands right now. I've seen a lot of speculation that the Cubs would be a 72, 75, maybe even worse team at this point. But I'm going to walk through why I don't think that's the case. So let's start with the offense. So I've talked about it. Everybody's talked about it. The Cubs need to add a couple bats. The Cubs don't have much lefty power. Cody Bellinger is no longer here. Jeimer Candelario is no longer here. And the Cubs need to, in theory, replace the production of those guys and improve. Well, let's look at what the Cubs were last year. The Cubs in 2023 were a top 10 offense. Depending on what measure you want to look at, most measures had the Cubs right around 9th, 8th, 10th, depending on where you look and what stats you're using. And that's a top 10 offense that maybe feels a little misleading. They were a little bit boom or bust. But let's look into why I think the Cubs have reason to be optimistic even without Bellinger and Candelario. So last year, we talked at great length many, many times about the roster construction at the start of the year. Seiya Suzuki was on the disabled list. The Cubs had, some young guys they could have given chances to, and they didn't. And some of that may be why David Ross is gone. It's hard to know going back who made what decisions, who was in agreement with whom, and all that sort of thing. But the Cubs last season gave 363 plate appearances to Eric Hosmer and Trey Mancini. I never expected Mancini to be as bad as he was. In fact, I think I actually credited the signing at the time. I thought it was a pretty decent pickup for the money they spent. But that sort of served a double hit. So those two combined for right around a 70 WRC plus. Mancini posted a 74 and Hosmer was 67. And while they were doing that meant that took roster spots away from other guys. So Christopher Morel had a really nice year last season, and he wound up only playing in 107 games. He was down crushing the ball at Iowa for like a month plus before he got called up. And with the Cubs not starting with 3 outfielders even on the active roster when they opened the season, they were trying to patchwork right field while Seiya was out with Miles Mastrobuoni and Trey Mancini and Patrick Wisdom. They could have given Nelson Velasquez a shot. They could have given Morel some run in the outfield. But they didn't. And so the Cubs didn't play the kids. They missed some opportunity there. As I noted, Seiya Suzuki missed a month of the season. Cody Bellinger missed a month. So what we saw that the Cubs were able to win some games. They actually played pretty well when Bellinger was out. That's when, to our friend of the pod, Cody Delmendo, it was the summer of Mike Tauchman at that point. They were able to get a lot done. And so this year, as we look forward, if we use the roster as it stands today, there is no Hosmer or Mancini. The Cubs have not brought in so-so, subpar, mediocre veterans, whatever, to flush out this roster. So if they come in today, several positions are set. Ian Happ's playing left field, Seiya Suzuki's in right field, Dansby Swanson's at shortstop, Nico Horner's at second, Yan Gomes and Miguel Amaya are catching. So the holes are center field, which last year was largely Mike Tauchman and Cody Bellinger. First base, right now would probably look to be Matt Mervis, Patrick Wisdom. There are plenty of options there. And third base, I would certainly hope it would be Christopher Morel at this point. He's played third base a lot in the Dominican League, and yesterday ended his season in Lidom, so he's coming back stateside to kind of probably get a month and get ready for spring training. And so, if I were going to map out the Cubs roster from here, it looks like it's probably see how things go in spring training. I know PCA is down in Arizona working with Dustin Kelly on his swing and his offense, and we saw at the end of the year he did not fare well, and he was overmatched by fastballs. But we also have to remember it was 19 plate appearances throughout a long baseball season. Plenty of guys. I mean, if you're a full-time starter, 19 plate appearances is 4 games, 5 games, depending on how many runs you're scoring. So guys go through a 4 or 5 game stretch where they're getting dominated by the fastball. It happens. It's part of baseball. Over the course of 162 games, that washes itself out. It's not a big deal. But when that stretch is the only thing you get in the major leagues that season, it certainly leaves an impression. So this could be, again, I'm not saying the Cubs are not going to make moves. For sake of this podcast, we're going to say that they don't. If they don't make moves, center field probably looks like some combination of Alexander Canario, Pete Crow Armstrong, and Mike Tauchman. I would prefer to see Mike Tauchman as the fourth outfielder and kind of rove around where needed. So I'd love to see PCA and Canario fight it out. Maybe whoever has the best spring training gets a shot. PCA's defense is amazing. He's fast. I'm really not worried about him. I think he's going to be a very good player. He's pretty much consensus top 15, top 10 prospect in baseball, depending on where you look. but they all have him in that same range. I mean, everybody thinks he's good. His glove is amazing and probably plays at like largely because of the defense, he's going to be kind of a 3-WAR player as his floor. Now, how well is he going to hit? I don't know. Like, I've seen comps to Kevin Kiermaier. Kevin Kiermaier is not, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Barry Bonds. But Kevin Kiermaier is a guy who's had a lot of good seasons, amazing defensively for a really long time. He's put together, I think, he's a free agent right now, but I assume he'll sign somewhere next year. I think will be his 14th season in the majors. So the floor plays, the defense and the speed will play. You look at first base. That's a little iffier right now. And one of the things, talking about the David Ross not playing the kids, in the moment, I could always kind of justify maybe why they weren't. They're in a pennant race. Matt Mervis was up for a while, 99 plate appearances and struggled. He did have some stretches, though, where he hit the ball pretty hard. The Cubs have now, 2 seasons in a row, missed real opportunities to find out who Matt Mervis is. And so now we're heading into 2024 and nobody knows. Some people believe in him. I see the offense. I mean, he crushes the ball at AAA. He has the entire time. The Cubs sent him back down. He kept hitting bombs. He kept hitting the ball hard. What's he going to be in the majors? I don't know. Plenty of guys have come up, struggled, gone down, come back up and found success. Anthony Rizzo did. Now, is Matt Mervis going to be Anthony Rizzo? I don't know. But the point is, we don't know. And we don't know because he was never really given a shot, because we were given 363 plate appearances to Eric Hosmer and Trey Mancini. So now the Cubs are evaluating, do they trade for Josh Naylor? Do they sign Rhys Hoskins? Do they look at some of the other available guys to play first base? I don't know. I think if you had a clear read on Matt Mervis, I think you'd know what you want to do. You'd either say, hey, we think Matt's a dude, and you bring in like another guy to share time, platoon. They can rotate through, defensively, DH. Matt Mervis is not, I don't think, any kind of star defensively. Or you would know at this point, you know what, he's not a guy. He's not somebody we're going to be able to put in there. And then you have to go make a trade or sign Rhys Hoskins or do something like that. But we don't know. And so now's the time. I mean, at this point, I talk about this from time to time. The prospects have value in multiple ways. They can obviously make you look like an attractive, growing team with a good future. They also can be trade value. They can also come up and be depth on your bench. They can come up and be starters. And that you have to get value from them somewhere. And the Cubs have a lot of guys who are, they have 6 top 100, pretty much, depending on where you look. They probably have another 6 or 7 guys that are very close to top 100. You get to the difference between prospect 80 and the prospect 150 is not that big. So you want to get value out of these guys somehow. Get them up on the bench. Get them up, use them in the starting lineup. Trade them, whatever. But the Cubs now have wasted 2 years with Matt Mervis, haven't traded him, haven't really used him at the big leagues, haven't invested in him, giving him a long run to, see if he can build some success. And that value is dripping away. He's already a first base only DHC kind of prospect. So that limits, that's why you weren't seeing Matt Mervis on top 100 lists for the most part. So that value has got to come somewhere. And the longer the Cubs just leave him in AAA to hit baseballs, his value just drops and drops and drops and drops. You bring in a couple more first basemen to put in front of him, prioritize Patrick Wisdom in front of him playing first base, and you're just letting his value go away because every year he gets a little bit older. And as we saw when we talked to Greg Huss when he came on the podcast a few weeks ago, talked about his BASH metric. One of the cool things about BASH is it factors in the player's age as related to the player's level in the minors. So, a 21-year-old kid playing AAA is off the charts because 21-year-olds don't play in AAA very often. If you're 28 and you're playing high A ball, that you might be having a massive season, but you're playing against, kids 6, 7, 8 years younger than you are. And so Matt Mervis is getting older and prospect status tends to go away about, 25, 26, 27, and so the Cubs are just kind of letting that drip. So I think this offseason, I think the Cubs need to either plan on giving Matt Mervis a run in the bigs or they really probably need to ship him out. Not entirely. I mean, I always root for the players, and I love to see guys succeed. And so I know that I want Max Mervis to go have success somewhere. But I also know that he's 27 and he's not getting younger. So as he comes up, he's going to lose more and more prospect status. He's going to be less and less attractive to teams in trade. He's already not the kind of prospect that would get a massive return back. But it's time to do something with him. Either let him move off to another organization and get a shot, or give him a shot here. So I would like to see him at first base. There's some other guys in the system that could potentially play first base. You look at third base. I talked about Morel. I think there are some additional players that maybe could push later in the year for playing time at third base. When Matt Shaw's coming up, he had a huge year after getting drafted last year. Ended the season in Double-A. If he goes and starts this, has a good spring, opens in Double-A or Triple-A, continues to just mash baseballs, at some point he's going to get a shot in Chicago. So I think the offense can be okay. I mean, the offense is not going to make strides forward unless a lot of the kids hit, but that's the variance. If PCA comes in and has a Corbin Carroll type year and contends for NL Rookie of the Year, that's a big win in center field. You're going to get an amazing defense. He's shown in the minor leagues he can hit for average, he can hit for power. And to be able to put that out there, I'm not saying I expect that this season, but that's the range, right? Like, he can give you good defense and a weak bat, but he could also wind up giving you good offense. Alexander Canario has shown he can hit. He's hit through the minors. He came back really well from his devastating injury last offseason to play the last month plus of the season in the minors. And, he did some good things in Chicago before the season was over. He didn't get many chances, again, because they weren't playing the young kids. But he's a guy with upside. Mervis has upside. I mean, there are just a good amount of options. And I think also, I know that the Tucker Barnhart signing got a lot of criticism last year. Tucker Barnhart did not have a good year, wound up getting released in the middle of the season. But they signed Tucker Barnhart because nobody knew what Miguel Amaya was going to be last year. Going into the season, he hadn't been healthy in 4 years, and he was coming off, Tommy John surgery. The end of last year, he was able to get back and play and hit, but he didn't really catch. He didn't really catch until spring training. So it made sense to start him in the minors, see how he was going to respond. But that's another guy. So now, as we look at this, I don't know that Yan Gomes is going to have as good a year as he had last year. He was really good. We talked about it a number of times. He was really, really good in the clutch, like unbelievably good, well beyond his career norms good. Some of that's going to regress to the mean, and that's fine. But I think as we see the season go on, I think we're going to start to see going from a heavy Gomes with some Amaya to more of a split. And I bet by the end of the season, as long as he stays healthy and plays well, Miguel Amaya is going to be the primary catcher in Chicago. And he's got a much better bat than Gomes or Barnhart. So that's another place where you can theoretically add some offense. I think the guys that are back, if Seiya Suzuki can be healthy, I think he's a 30 to 35 home run guy. He was really good in the second half once he came back, got back to the lineup after taking the 5 games off to kind of do a mental reset. Mike Tauchman was good. I don't think Mike Tauchman, it's not a good thing for the Cubs if Mike Tauchman has to be the starting center fielder for long stretches of time. He's a good player. He's shown value across multiple seasons with multiple teams, but at this point in his career, he shouldn't be the starting center fielder. So I'm hoping that PCA or Alexander Canario can step up. I think Ian Happ, he was a little more streaky last year, but the numbers came out as good or better as they were the year before. I think Ian Happ has shown who he is. He's an above average outfielder with a pretty good glove for left field. And that's a decent place to be. His floor is really high. Dansby Swanson, similar. He did not have his best offensive season last year, but he still hit, 20 plus home runs. He needs probably to step back a little bit and get a little bit more rest. I think him wearing down at the end of the season was one of the things that happened. He did miss time with that injury, missed a month. But once he came back, he literally played every single game until the last day of the season. And you just got to mix guys in, get him rest, a little rest here and there. I mean, you could just see that he was, he's not a guy who presses. He's been through these situations before. But he just, you have to figure it out. And, You want to keep guys fresh, and the Cubs didn't do that last year with Dansby Swanson. So I think you can get a little more out of him. His glove is amazing. His glove is going to be there. I would expect him to hit better. So I think that's one of the things that can happen. Now, back to the Hosmer and Mancini thing. We're going to talk about pitching here in a second. But by eating that money, Hosmer was league minimum. That was not a big deal. But between Barnhart and Mancini, the Cubs ate, that was about $10 million that had they not signed those two players, maybe they'd have been better off to start with, or those three players. Maybe they'd have been better off to start with, but then they would have had a little bit more in the budget. And when they went at the trade deadline, they did pick up Jeimer Candelario and they got Jose Cuas, but maybe they would have had enough money in there to get another arm, maybe two more arms. So that's where those decisions, Jed likes to talk about stacking good decisions on good decisions, because every decision you make is going to impact things that happen further down the road. So you make multiple bad signings. The Cubs were carrying the rest of Jason Hayward's $23 million plus the $10 million from $10.5 million, actually basically about $11 million from Hosmer, Mancini, and Barnhart. That's $34 million of basically dead money. And 10 of those are going to hit this year. So you look at the pitching, the Cubs have a top 10 offense. Ideally, they find some of that power, but I don't want to go all Billy Bean with Moneyball here, but there is some ability by giving Morel more playing time, getting Canario, PCA, get some of those young guys involved, give Matt Mervis a shot. You've got a chance to make up some of that production. Now, a lot of things have to go right for this team to really build and grow and be better than they were last season, to go in as the division favorite, to get up more around 90, 91 wins to potentially win the division. I don't know if the team as it's set does that, but I think this team as it is today would probably be roughly a 500 team. And we go to the pitching, again, the Cubs were top 10 in pitching last year. The Cubs had what they needed. They just didn't do enough in the margins. We talked about that all season. Losing close games, not, holding leads early in the season, having an atrocious May and a bad, and second half of September. Those things killed the Cubs. They were great. The middle months of the season, they were great. They played at like a 95 win pace for a really long time. And when you look at the pitching, the Cubs were, using some Fangraphs ratings again, little variance depending on what categories you look at, what statistical measures you choose to rank on. But, the Cubs were above average with starting pitching. They were roughly 8th. They were 15th in relief pitching. So they were certainly above average. Starters pitched the majority of your innings, and they were top 10 in baseball, and they were right at dead center average in relief pitching. And we saw last year the four guys that Ross trusted were very good until they wore out late in the season. But when you break this down, so let's go to the starting rotation. So the Cubs had a top 10, starting pitching numbers last year. And when you really look across the season, they never really had a solid, consistent five guys. To open the season, Drew Smyly was pitching too much. I'm glad he's going to be in the bullpen this year, or should be in the bullpen this year. Kyle Hendricks missed the first month of the season. Jameson Taillon was awful to start, had a good second half. And you look at that, so the Cubs really only had 2 or 3 guys going at any one time. To start the season, Justin Steele and Marcus Stroman pitched really well. And Drew Smyly got off to a really good start too, while other guys struggled. Wisniewski couldn't quite stick. They had some struggle with that 5th spot. When Hendricks came back, it kind of solidified it. But, you get towards June, and Marcus Stroman missed over a month. He missed most of the second half of the season. He didn't throw even 6 innings in a single start again after July 15th. He didn't throw 7 after June 20th. He just missed a ton of time. And once he got that blister in London, came back, and then he had just a rough stretch of giving up just huge amounts of runs. He had like a 9 ERA across like 5 or 6 starts before he went on the injured list. And I think, he wound up being hurt the rest of the year. And I think a big part of that was he was pitching hurt, when he was struggling like that. So we talk about, one of the things I hear about the Cubs a lot is they've got to replace Bellinger and they got to replace Stroman just off the top to get back to kind of where they were last year. Well, I don't know. Replacing Bellinger is hard. He had a huge year. He missed a month, so that drops his numbers a little bit. But Stroman, I mean, he was amazing in the first half, but if you look at the totality of his season, that may not be that hard to replace. They may have that internally. The other thing with Drew Smyly is, he hasn't thrown big season starter innings since like 2016. He had a bunch of arm injuries. He's been in and out of the bullpen. And I think at this point in his career, he's not getting back to being that guy. He can be very effective. He can go out and have, we saw it started last year. He can go out and have a run of good starts. But he's not going to be, he can't be a full season starter. He starts getting up over 100 innings and it starts getting dicey. That's when he was really, really struggling until he got put in the pen late in the year. So get him out of the rotation. Kyle Hendricks missed a month, and Kyle Hendricks comes with some risk. Like, he was really good once he came back last year. If he keeps that up and continues pitching like that guy, he's a pretty good back end of the rotation guy. Maybe even a 3. Maybe not a 3, but he's certainly a solid 4 and an excellent 5 in your rotation. So, what can the Cubs do? The Cubs want to have a healthy 5 guys and get more consistency out of that rotation. I think Justin Steele really stretched himself out last year. I know he struggled a little bit at the end. He was way beyond his career highs in innings, but now he's done that. Now he knows what it takes to pitch to that level over the course of a season. He's going to be stronger. He made himself stronger by pitching that many innings. And I think there's going to be a lot to like with Steele. He's now really, he's been that guy now for a season and a half. So I don't, as long as he stays healthy and continues to have that bullet spin on that fastball and, work his pitches the way he has, I think he's every reason to think he may not be a Cy Young contender, but there's every reason to think he's legitimately a top of the rotation starter on just about any team at this point. They don't really have a clear number 2. So that's, when we talk about what the Cubs want to do, I would love to see them get, Yamamoto. I would love to see them get Shota Imanaga, potentially trade for Shane Bieber, sign Jordan Montgomery, like some of those guys, somebody to put up with Steele at the sort of the top of that rotation. I think Jameson Taillon is going to come back well this year. He pitched pretty well in the second half of last season, even knowing that, he was still getting that extra arm side run on his fastball that was causing him problems. And he said throughout the second half of the season that was going to be an off-season fix. So I'm sure he's getting that worked out. I mean, it sounded like he and Tommy Hottovy had a plan. So if he can get that cleaned up, like he's going to be a good, solid number 3 starter. I think he's going to have a good year, probably an ERA in the low 3s. I think there's a lot to like. And then the Cubs have, again, its potential, right? If the Cubs don't bring in anybody else, there's now a path for some of the young players, some of the young pitchers to take spots in the rotation. I think Hayden Wesneski learned a lot about himself last year in terms of what it takes to be a starter. I'm still pretty optimistic about him being potentially successful as a starting pitcher. We saw a really good run from Jordan Wicks at the end of the season. Ben Brown looked like he was going to be the next one up before he got hurt in August. I think there's a lot to like there. Cade Horton is absolutely flying through the system, and I don't think he'll be with the Cubs to start, but I think if he stays healthy and continues to be successful the way he has, I think he will absolutely pitch in Chicago in 2024. So, again, if the Cubs don't bring anybody in, they're probably going to have to go Steele at the 1, Taillon at the 2, Hendricks at the 3, and then you're probably looking at 2 guys out of Wesneski and Assad and Wicks and Brown and eventually Horton. So there's potential there. Is it rock solid guaranteed? No, that's why we want the Cubs to bring in guys and why I think they will. But that does start to give some of these young guys a chance to come up and show themselves. And with the bullpen, the bullpen had a lot of struggles. Those 4 guys were really good. Michael Fulmer will not be back this year. He's a free agent, and he had Tommy John surgery after the season. He's not going to pitch in 2024. Julian Merriweather looks very good. Adbert Alzolay had a very good season last year. Mark Leiter Jr., he'll be back, assuming he can, assuming it was fatigue that cost him his split finger that he uses to just absolutely wreck left-handers. He should be back, and I don't see, why he can't have success. He's a guy who bounced around forever as a starter and a long man, but Cubs found a couple things, found that split, found a couple things he throws really well in short bursts, and turned him into a good solid reliever. But they have to build on that. So one of the big issues they had last season was growing the pen. We talked about it a lot. One thing, because the Cubs played so many tight games, because they were chasing the Brewers the entire season, chasing the playoffs, and they had lost so much ground in May that they had to make it up. There was a lot of pressure to just get today's win, and they did that at the expense of really developing a bullpen. They should have been taking some of those opportunities to get Daniel Palencia more work, bring Luke Little up earlier, just get other guys in. So the end of the season, it was pretty much the four. It was Fulmer and Alzolay and Merriweather and Leiter, and then they started mixing in Jose Cuas once they got him. Jose Cuas was already heading towards overworked in Kansas City before the Cubs traded for him. And I think there's a lot to like there, but then the Cubs continued to use him heavily, so he was like everybody else. He was past his career highs in innings. He was worn out, and so that's a decent starting point for this pen. So you'll have Alzolay, Merriweather, Cuas, and Leiter. I think we saw some good things out of Luke Little, some good and some bad. You get rookies up, they're not all going to just tear it up from the start. Daniel Palencia's stuff is just tremendous. He's just got to get more command. The Cubs have added Michael Arias and Bailey Horn to the 40-man roster. So they've got guys on the roster who hopefully can step up and take bullpen roles. And, I think the Cubs need to add a couple impact arms at the back end of that pen. They don't necessarily have to go get a closer. I see a lot of people, wanting the Cubs to go get Josh Hader. Josh Hader's probably getting, $20 million a year for 4 years. Maybe something like the Edwin Diaz contract last year, 5-100, something $20 million for 3 to 5 years. If the Cubs get Josh Hader, great. I mean, he's an amazing closer. He's one of the best in the game for a reason. But I don't necessarily think they have to go that direction. I think you can always get a closer at the deadline if you need to. I really like the idea of a trade with the Guardians for Class A. I'm pretty sure he has 4 years of team control left. So he's already really good, would be around for a while. He and Adbert and Merriweather at the back end of the bullpen would be absolutely nasty. But if they don't bring anybody in, they've got some arms that can potentially do some damage. I mean, Caleb Killian, he's kind of losing his prospect status to a large extent. He's struggled when he's come up, but he's a guy that was looked at potentially down the road as a bullpen arm. If he has some good pitches, if he can command those and work in shorter bursts, throw a little harder, focus on his best pitches, maybe he's somebody who can help in the bullpen. I don't know. Michael Rucker's still around. I know I'm not a huge fan of his. Keegan Thompson had really kind of a lost year last year. It'll be interesting to see if the Cubs can get him back to where he was in 2022. But when you look at this, I think there's every chance that the Cubs starting rotation could be honestly pretty close to as good as the rotation was last year. You won't have that Stroman, but the Cubs effectively didn't have Stroman in the second half when they played some of their best baseball. The Steele, Hendricks, Tyone, if those guys can carry the load and a couple of the kids emerge, maybe they're fine. Again, I want the Cubs to make those additions. But that's kind of where I see the team. And unfortunately, they have the dead money. I think the Cubs are going to certainly go over the first level of the CBT. I could definitely see them going over the second level of the CBT. Go spend $50-60 million on players this year. Leave themselves some. I don't think they're going to want to cross over the third level. I don't think Jed's going to want to take that draft slot hit at this point. But you go up and leave yourself $10 to $20 million under that third threshold. That gives you some ability to go make moves at the deadline and potentially get, if you're in that position the Cubs were in 2016, you need that one more piece. It gives you a chance to go get that. So that's kind of where I see him sitting right now. I think right now the Cubs are a pretty average 500 team. Now, if we turn the clock back to last season before the Cubs added Dansby Swanson and, Jamison Tyone and the guys they added, I would have told you probably that team with no additions was probably a 70-73 win team. And so again, people get so tired of hearing it, raise the floor. The Cubs have transitioned this. It is a rebuild, although it's a pretty quick rebuild. When the Cubs went through their first rebuild, it was a good, 4+ years. This one, they're kind of turning it around. They could have been in the playoffs in 2. And hopefully they'll make it this year and it'll be 3. And they're doing it in a way where they're getting just that floor is getting a little bit more set. And they're in a position now where, if they get, really good production from a rookie or a young player. Hayden Wesneski can, really get comfortable and establish himself as doesn't have to be an ace, doesn't have to be a 2. If Hayden Wesneski can give you average starting pitching, that's a win. Now it's a bigger win if the Cubs also sign Shota Imanaga and or trade for Shane Bieber or Jesus Luzardo with Miami. Get one of those guys in here, get somebody up with Steele at the top of the rotation, and then you just have more and more depth at the bottom of the rotation. So, the Cubs are not in a great place right now. I know it's not exciting to see Jed Hoyer sign nobody and sign nobody and sign nobody. And the sleepy Jed memes are going to continue until something happens. But I don't think the Cubs need to race to make signings just to make signings. I think Jed is very clearly a methodical front office executive. He's risk averse. He's going to do what he can to, not make big risks or not have big downside risk. He's willing to move on from players. They ate the last year of Jason Hayward. They are eating $10 million this year from Tucker Barnhart and Trey Mancini. He'll make those moves, but he's trying, in my opinion, a little bit too hard to avoid risk. And I think sometimes, risk and reward go together. Sometimes you have to take a risk to get a big reward. And I get some of these, when you look at the trades that have happened and the signings that have happened in the space, in the guys that, Cubs fans were dreaming of, the Yankees overpaid for Juan Soto, which is fine. Again, that's a choice. Like, you want to go get your guy, and they got their guy. I think there's a reason why San Diego made that trade before, the Shohei thing was done, because I think they saw their offer, got the guys they wanted, and had a pretty good feeling that nobody after Shohei signed was going to come in with a deal any better than that one. So they took it. Shohei Ohtani signed for more money than people expected, and then sort of less with the deferred money. But based on everything he's said, everything his agent said, and all signs point to he just wanted to be in LA and wasn't going to leave. It sounds like the Angels were his number 2 if something with the Dodgers hadn't worked out. And you look at the Glasnow trade, I think the Rays really liked Ryan Pepio, who they got from the Dodgers. And again, like, if you put that thing in the trade value calculator, and the Rays got an absolute steal in that. They got a ton of value back for Glasnow. So, I'm sure Jed was probably unwilling to pay that price. And now you look at Yamamoto, he's starting to be projected for $300+ million. And again, like, that's going to be a 10+ year deal on a 25-year-old pitcher who hasn't pitched in the major leagues yet. His stuff is amazing. I think it's going to play. I think whoever gets him is going to be very happy. But there's no doubt risk there. And it maybe is sounding like risk Jed doesn't want to take, but I'll take that with a grain of salt. We've seen so much over the last week where the reports that are coming out don't always match with reality. You never know, team side or player side, who might be dropping something to, get a certain thing out in the media to try to play into negotiations. And Jed's a guy that plays close to the vest anyway. So I don't know what they're going to do. I would be surprised if they signed Yamamoto over $300 million. But until he's signed, who knows? I think Imanaga makes sense. I think getting Cody Bellinger back makes sense. I think, we'll see, again, spending his money, but I think the Yankees trading for Alex Verdugo and trading for Juan Soto probably takes them out of the Cody Bellinger, situation. The Giants signing Lee out of Korea, that he's probably their big addition. They could spend more. They may still go after Bellinger. But it sounds at this point like it's largely down to the Blue Jays and the Cubs. Maybe Seattle might jump in on it. Rhys Hoskins, again, Cubs seem like a obvious fit. They seem like one of the favorites. I heard today that Seattle's interested. He's from Northern California. I don't know, Northern California to Washington, closer to home could be a draw. But if I had to put money down, I still think Rhys Hoskins to the Cubs makes a lot of sense. But at some point they've got to get some guys. If they don't, Jed is going to be talk about risk. Jed's going to be putting a lot of eggs in the basket of the young players, which might be fine. The Cubs have a good deep system, and those guys are coming up to the major league level now. Maybe it is time to see what they're going to do. I would rather mix them in and kind of thread the needle with, a couple additions to help make this lineup better and deeper, and then also still leave some space where the young players could get time if they really push for it and, have the kinds of seasons guys started out having last year at Iowa. So we'll see how it goes. This is probably the last time I'll record before the holidays. We got some vacation coming up. Depending on what the Cubs do, I'm back to Charlotte. I'm in and out of Charlotte, but I'm kind of back, at the end of the month. So maybe I'll get one more out before New Year's. We'll see what happens. Hopefully by the time we hit New Year's, Jed's made a couple moves, maybe made a trade happen, maybe signed a couple guys. I think even getting a bullpen arm or two, getting Rhys Hoskins in the fold would just start to make, Cubs fans, exhale, breathe a little sigh of relief and feel a little bit better about where the offseason's going. I'll continue to say it, though. The important thing is what this roster looks like when they head into spring training, not what it looks like today. You don't get bonus points for, you don't start with 3 wins ahead because you signed a guy in November as opposed to January. The free agent process takes what it takes. Last year was a deep class of top-level guys, and they tended to go pretty quickly. The year before that, that was the strike year, so everything happened early, or it didn't happen until after the CBA was worked out. The year before that, 2019, when Manny Machado and Bryce Harper were free agents, neither one of them signed until February. So these things take time. They work on team schedules. They work based on player schedules. Agents of some of these guys, Scott Boras is known to just kind of hold and see what offers wind up coming through. So maybe, buckle in. It's going to be a bit of a ride here, but hopefully the Cubs get a couple moves happen. I hope everybody has a great holiday. Enjoy some time away from work. Enjoy some time away from school. Enjoy some time with family, hopefully, your family or friends. Find something fun to do. Get out, have some fun, relax, enjoy. Look forward to a good 2022. A good 2024. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share an episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. And check out the Patreon page at CubsPSPlus.patreon.com to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the Cubs PS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!